أصحاب السعادة.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I hereby open the ninth session of the conference. In order to consider item 7 on our agenda, which pertains to the implementation of Article 63, paragraph 4C of the Convention, including discussion on cooperation with relevant international and regional organizations and mechanisms and non-governmental organizations. It is now my pleasure with regards to this agenda item that we will be addressing issues pertaining to cooperation with relevant international and regional organizations and mechanisms, as well as non-governmental organizations. The Conference of State Parties has been established pursuant to Article 63 in order to improve the State Parties' abilities and cooperation to achieve the objectives enshrined in the Convention. And it has also been done in order to encourage the achievement of such objectives. Article 63, paragraph 4C states that the Conference of the State Parties shall agree upon activities, procedures, and methods of work to achieve these objectives, including, of course, cooperating with relevant international and regional organizations and mechanisms, as well as non-governmental organizations. The General Assembly, in its resolution 69/199, invited the Conference of State Parties to the Convention to give due consideration to the implementation of Article 63, paragraph 4C of the Convention. I would like to make reference to a document submitted by Finland entitled Civil Society Engagement in the Implementation of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, with the document number I'm referring to is CAC/COSP/2015/CRP.3. Distinguished delegates, I would now like to ask to give the floor to member states for their observations and comments in relation to agenda item 7. And the very first state on my list of speakers is the European Union. So I give the floor to the European Union. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The following countries align themselves with these statements: Turkey, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Montenegro, Iceland, Serbia, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, Liechtenstein, and Norway. Chair, when we collectively drafted and agreed the UN Convention Against Corruption, we all shared the view expressed in preamble paragraph 11 of the Convention that if efforts on prevention and eradication of corruption are to be effective, states must cooperate with one another with the support and involvement of individuals and groups outside the public sector, such as civil society, non-governmental organizations, and community-based organizations. Through the years, we have, as states parties, had many opportunities to discuss the possible involvement of civil society in the work that takes place in the framework of the Anti-Corruption Convention, including the work that takes place at country level and the work that takes place at international level in the Conference of the State Parties and its subsidiary bodies. We are very happy to continue the discussion under this agenda item, and we would like that to be a positive and forward-looking discussion in which we can share our positive experiences and practices and build on them. At the national level, Chair, we believe that the broad majority of states parties have actively involved in civil society in their country reviews, and that they actually had a very positive experience with civil society's active participation in those processes. We believe that a transparent review process is important for any successful national anti-corruption policy, and we would therefore invite all state parties to reflect on further ways to improve the transparency of their review processes. State parties could, for instance, publish updated review timetables for country reviews. They could share information on the name of the review coordinator, focal point, and announce completion of a country review and make the report available. In fact, state parties could make the self-assessment and country reports available online so that the review process allows for active involvement of broad sectors of the population in the efforts undertaken by the state parties concerned. As a follow-up, the state parties could also organize briefings and public debates about their review processes and the findings of the report. At the level of the conference, Chair, we would like to recall the positive experience we had with the participation of civil society organizations as observers in the different sessions of the COSP. We also believe that the practice of providing briefings to civil society in the margins of the implementation review group has been useful and has given rise to a positive engagement of civil society in the work of the subsidiary body. We would therefore support continuation and, where possible, improvement of that practice. Briefings could, for instance, take place at regular intervals during the meetings rather than be concentrated on a single day. Also, there seems to be a general feeling that briefings could also very usefully be organized in the margins of other subsidiary bodies, such as the Working Group on Prevention. Briefings are, of course, a good way to pass information from the state parties to civil society. But it would also be extremely useful to create communication mechanisms through which the state parties could benefit from the work already carried out by civil society. In this regard, we could wholeheartedly support the participation of NGOs as observers in the work of the subsidiary bodies. But we know that not all state parties would, at this stage, be comfortable with this idea. Therefore, a more modest approach could be to allow subsidiary bodies whenever they consider that useful and appropriate to open up discussions on certain topics or agenda items to a broader set of stakeholders. We could also allow them to invite experts or expert organizations to provide them with information on certain topics. Finally, Chair, we would like to continue engaging in a positive and forward-looking way with our fellow states parties on this issue in the coming years, including at the next sessions of the Conference of the State Parties, to explore whether such a new approach could allow us to come to a consensus on possible steps that could be taken to allow state parties and the review process to benefit more effectively from the significant experience that is readily available from civil society. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, representative of the EU. I now give the floor to representative of the Sudan. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of the delegations, peace and blessings of Allah be upon you all. Fighting corruption shall always remain a challenge that cannot be addressed by administrative procedures and legislative actions. It's quite a complicated issue that requires an integrated effort involving all stakeholders, starting with the state and its agencies and institutions, in addition to the civil society and its organizations and the media and its entire myriad of outlets, without forgetting in the private sector, of course. And the need for them to realize the danger associated with corruption as a practice and behavior. Based on that, we'd like to emphasize the importance of the international and regional mechanisms and NGOs in fighting corruption and promoting the culture of integrity, probity, and conduct, and to contribute to raising awareness about the risks associated with corruption. It's a role that should be understood and realized by all of us because of its paramount importance and vitality. However, we would like to highlight the following points in this regard. The role of the organization should always remain as complementary to the efforts made by the states and the roles they play, so they can work with them on a participatory and integrated manner to complement their efforts. We have no doubt that such a partnership will lead to genuine, excellent outcomes. Secondly, the organizations cannot conduct the duties and tasks of the states or on their behalf, and therefore there need not be a context of competitiveness and hostility that some NGOs demonstrate vis-à-vis certain states and figures for their own hidden agendas that they do not disclose. Certain organizations would like to rank the states as per their own foundations of judgment, although these foundations lack the basis that should be there. Mr. Chair, my country is engaged in the dialogue process that is currently taking place on the socio-economic, political levels to discuss issues related to politics and good governance in Sudan. And we encourage the work of international organizations as my country hosts some of them. I would like to highlight, Mr. Chair, the fact that we need to maintain the governmental nature of the working groups within the convention, and at the same time, we welcome the contribution of the organizations, but to maintain their role as is when it comes to the implementation of the UNCAC. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the distinguished delegate of Sudan for the statement, and now I'll give the floor to the representative of Finland.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for giving me the floor. Finland welcomes this opportunity to discuss cooperation with relevant entities. The agenda item refers to a variety of stakeholders. Finland, in its intervention, would like to refer to only one aspect of this agenda item, and that is cooperation with non-government organizations and civil society more broadly. The reason is it is this issue which time and time again has been raised in connection with the review of the implementation of UNCAC, and it has become a divisive issue. Finland is indeed very concerned about this divisiveness, the fact that we are at times talking past one another, not trying to find ways to work more effectively together. Now, it is true that disagreements themselves are nothing new in international cooperation. The problem, however, is that the present disagreement over the role of civil society in responding to corruption has become a serious one, which is taking up more and more time, resources, and energy, in particular in our different meetings in Vienna. It is for this reason that Finland undertook to prepare a discussion room paper. And thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for drawing the attention of the plenary to conference room paper number 3 among the conference's documentation. This conference room paper describes the evolution of this debate in section 2. It seeks to identify the positions and the underlying arguments for these positions on all sides in sections 3 and 4. And here I would like to be very optimistic and constructive. The extent to which we can find common ground, and indeed the extent to which there already is common ground, that is dealt with in the last section of the paper. I would like to emphasize that in preparing this conference room paper, Finland did not intend to put forward a national position, but instead simply to help the participants here at this session of the Conference of the State Party to better understand the debate, the sensitivities, and the concerns that have been brought forward on all sides. That is because we need to understand and we need to respect one another's concerns. It is only in this way that we can find better ways of working together towards our common goal. I do not intend to go through the entire paper. It is a rather long one, but I will simply pick up some of the highlights. And I do wish to draw the attention of the session participants that there is a lot of substance in this paper, and I do hope that it would be helpful in our debates here. As I mentioned, section 2 provides an overview of how the debate has evolved. The key source of contention has been paragraph 42 of the terms of reference for the implementation review mechanism adopted way back in Doha in 2009. Part of that paragraph states that the implementation review group shall be an open-ended intergovernmental group of states parties. Following the next conference, or the next session of the Conference of States Parties in Marrakesh in 2011, the scope of the disagreement is specifically over the participation of non-governmental organizations as observers in the implementation review group and in the working groups. Some states parties have concerns about working with non-governmental organizations within the framework of the implementation review group and the working groups, while other states parties are of the view that the input of non-governmental organizations on this international level is not only valuable, but necessary for effective implementation. Since it was recognized that more work was needed to build confidence in the role of NGOs, Resolution 4/6 from Marrakesh requested states parties and signatories to use the briefings and to draw on the discussions and proposals of the 4th session of the conference to continue constructive dialogue on the contribution of non-governmental organizations to the mechanism. Section 3 of Finland's conference room paper then goes on to identify and analyze the arguments that have been presented by all sides in support of the positions. And I will simply list them. As I mentioned, they are analyzed in the conference room paper. One is the wording itself of paragraph 42 of the terms of reference, this reference to the intergovernmental process. Second, the opinion that was obtained from the United Nations Office of Legal Affairs. Third, the argument that the Implementation Review Group deals with sensitive and confidential information. Fourth, the argument that input of all the relevant stakeholders provides added value at the level of the Implementation Review Group and the working groups. Fifth, the role of non-governmental organizations as advocates. Sixth, the role of non-governmental organizations in providing expertise and resources. And finally, the appropriateness or qualifications of non-governmental organizations active in the international and intergovernmental level in dealing with corruption-related issues. Now, this question of appropriateness or qualifications, it has been tossed every now and then. Finland believes that some of the criteria or some of the issues here are what is meant by relevance. In other words, what are the relevant non-governmental organizations? Do we want generalist or specialist non-governmental organizations? How professional, how responsible, how accountable, and how representative should these non-governmental organizations be? I may mention, Mr. Chairman, that on this last point of the representativeness of non-governmental organizations, I have had the privilege of having very useful discussions with one delegation here in St. Petersburg, and I would like to thank that delegation for the opportunity. In section 4 of the conference room paper, Finland notes that this divisive issue of the participation of non-governmental organizations in the Implementation Review Group has at times extended to other contexts, such as the value or lack of value of the involvement of civil society in the conduct of country reviews, in other words, on the national level, and the involvement of civil society more broadly on the national level in the prevention of and response to corruption. In the paper, Finland concludes that, if I may say so, these other issues are largely non-issues, in that we believe that there is so much common ground in the various positions in favor of the importance, the value of civil society involvement on the national level, that that should essentially be diffused as a source of contention. Thus, the remaining issue that needs to be addressed is non-governmental organization participation as observers in the IRG and the working groups. Again, Finland would like to be positive and optimistic and say that there is a considerable amount of common ground evolving in this area. And that is why it is very beneficial that here in St. Petersburg we have the opportunity to continue the constructive dialogue called for in Marrakesh 4 years ago. We should keep the non-governmental organizations engaged in the extensive work needed in the implementation of UNCAC, and at the same time, we should ensure that the concerns of some states parties regarding NGOs in the IRG working group level are respected and addressed. We also hope that the discussions could identify these concerns more clearly so that all are aware of what they are. To summarize Finland's conclusions, as stated in the conference room paper, different states continue to have a different understanding of what is meant by paragraph 42 of the Rules of Procedure. The views of the various sides are based on fundamental concerns which need to be recognized and respected as legitimate. Resolution 4/6 from Marrakesh, which establishes briefings for NGOs on the margins of sessions of the Implementation Review Group, is the status quo. That is where the basis for our work. New resolutions, however, you may call them Marrakesh Plus resolutions or whatever you wish, they may be adopted in the light of lessons learned and experiences gained in the conduct of the review mechanism, and in particular, as confidence increases between states parties and non-governmental organizations. Mr. Chairman, in talking with various delegations leading up to St. Petersburg and here at St. Petersburg, I sense a willingness to go beyond Resolution 4/6 and consider proposals for a step-by-step confidence-building process. And therefore, I would like now to change gears. I have so far basically explained Finland's conference room paper. I would now like to put forward the position of Finland. In changing gears, I would also then note that Finland aligns itself with the statement made on behalf of the European Union. Various proposals have been suggested, different steps that can be considered as the necessary degree of confidence is secured. These are: the Implementation Review Group and the working groups could consider inviting non-governmental representatives to contribute to meetings in the context of panels. Second, in particular, considering that the second cycle shall presumably deal with prevention and asset recovery, the Implementation Review Group and the appropriate working groups, whenever they consider this useful and appropriate, could open up discussion on certain topics or agenda items to a broader set of stakeholders, including non-governmental organizations. Third, using as a model the present practice in the Implementation Review Group, briefings for NGOs could be considered also in the margins of the working groups, in particular the working groups on prevention and asset recovery. Fourth, particular attention should be paid to identifying non-governmental organizations that represent a diversity of experience in working constructively with state parties in different parts of the world. And finally, Finland hopes that individual states parties could become even more active in identifying and working with such relevant non-governmental organizations, also when preparing for meetings of the Implementation Review Group and the relevant working groups. Mr. Chairman, I apologize for speaking at some length here, but Finland does hope that the conference room paper and now these various ideas of a step-by-step process could help us in finding better ways in which states parties and all of the relevant stakeholders can work together. By doing so, we will all benefit through more effective implementation of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
أشكر وفد فنلندا على بيانه وأعطي الكلمة الآن.
I thank Finland, and I now call the next speaker, Venezuela.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair, delegates. In the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, citizens' participation is enshrined in the Constitution, and it has been for more than 16 years. That is because sovereignty resides in the people according to Article 5 of our Constitution. So since our 1999 Constitution, all citizens have the right to participate freely in public affairs, either directly or through their elected representatives. Therefore, the participation of the people in the drawing up, execution, and oversight of public management is the necessary medium to guarantee full development both at individual and collective level. It is the obligation of the Venezuelan state to facilitate the best and most favorable conditions for citizens' participation. This is also included in our Magna Carta in Article 66. Chairman, citizens' participation in Venezuela is a priority. That is why the National Executive established the Ministry of Popular Power for Communes and Social Movements. Its mission is to implement social policies of democratic practice in the field of comprehensive promotion, assistance, and social development. In order to comply with our duty to create the most suitable mechanisms for citizens' participation, in Venezuela, we have set up social organizations called communal councils and communes. These are fora for participation, articulation, and integration. Citizens work there to improve their reality and directly manage public policies. An example of this are the citizens' bureaus. These are public offices which enable citizens to make complaints when they become aware of both civil servants and individuals who are involved in irregularities in managing public funds or assets. This is in line with paragraph 2 of Article 13 of UNCAC. These citizens' bureaus were set up by the Constitution and provide information to citizens. When complaints are made to these bureaus, these complaints then improve the effectiveness and efficiency of public management, and citizens are more satisfied because they can make complaints directly. There is no intermediary necessary. And through these citizens' bureaus, the state is closer to people because these bureaus provide information and training to citizens. For example, we have training programs in public procurement for members of the community. We currently have about 1,500 of these citizens' bureaus all over the country. Vice Chairman, in Venezuela, we are convinced that the only way to achieve effective citizen participation is through grassroots organizations. There is no other option. In our opinion, since President Hugo Chavez Frias took power, and today with President Nicolas Maduro, in my country, we no longer have intermediaries in communication between the state and people. Today, citizens have their own voice, and therefore we reiterate the need for this mechanism to maintain its intergovernmental nature in accordance with the terms of reference. We believe that the participation of citizens is necessary for the review process through comprehensive consultations at national level, and this should be promoted by each state in accordance with its own reality and legal system. but the intergovernmental nature of the review mechanism is necessary because it is the only way to achieve the effective action of society in oversight and monitoring of the effective use of public resources. This means that for our delegation, we cannot presume that civil society organizations have been excluded or have no place in the review mechanism. We insist, in fact, that Articles 28 and 30 of the Terms of Reference anticipate their participation in the terms agreed by states parties and approved by this conference at its third session. As is well known, the review group was established by a resolution of this conference with its own terms of reference, which list its characteristics and intergovernmental nature. Therefore, we were quite surprised when, at the meetings of the review group, there's one day for information meetings with NGOs, when some of them have not respected the contents of Resolution 4/6, which governs their behavior. Unfortunately, this does not help build trust, which that resolution anticipated as a step towards continuing dialogue on this subject. I would also like to point out that we do not believe it is very useful for some NGOs to bring their reports to the conference, claiming that they are on the same level as the country reports that emanate from the review mechanism. Those reports are the only valid reports and the only ones which are useful for our country, and that will be recognized when we are requesting technical assistance. Vice Chairman, within this framework, and to conclude, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela is proud of having forged and continuing to forge true participation of citizens given the framework of our Constitution and our national legislation, which establishes citizens' power and incorporates the participation of the people in accordance with a democratic and social state with the rule of law and justice, granting power to citizens and building a culture against corruption at all levels. Thank you.
أشكر ممثل فنزويلا لمداخلته.
I thank Venezuela. And I now call the Netherlands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I would like to align myself with the statement made by the EU. Secondly, I would like to thank the delegation of Finland for their discussion paper on civil society engagement, summarizing the debate on this issue that has been going on since 2009. While the important role of civil society in addressing corruption is widely recognized, strongly diverging views continue to exist when it comes to the question whether or not NGOs are allowed to participate as observers in the Implementation Review Group and the UNCAC working groups. As is stated in the Finnish paper, at the time when Resolution 4/6 was agreed in Marrakesh, very few states parties had undergone a country visit or had attended a meeting in which civil society participated. At that time, the good practice on civil society engagement in country visits was not yet evident. We are now 5 years later with experience in this review mechanism. Many countries have engaged NGOs in the review process. So in my view, it's about to take time to take further steps. Mr. Chair, I would like to refer to the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Association and Assembly. He noted in 2014 that the right to freedom of association and assembly also applies at the multilateral level, and that the exclusion of civil society from UNCAC subsidiary bodies was at the bottom end of the spectrum among multilateral bodies. I would like to state it very clearly here. In the view of the Netherlands, there is no contradiction between the intergovernmental nature of the review mechanism and participation of NGOs as observers. I would like to quote ECOSOC resolution from 1996, it's number 33, paragraph 50. This resolution gives guidance on the meaning of the wording intergovernmental nature. It means that active participation of non-governmental organizations in UN sessions is very welcome, but it is limited to attending the meeting, making statements, and submitting documents, and it does not entail a negotiating role. Mr. Chair, I am very well aware that there is a clear wish expressed by some countries to keep at least a part of the IRG and working group deliberations as a closed session. In my view, this fits in a gradual approach to continue to build confidence as we task ourselves to do in Resolution 4/6. I would like to encourage countries to think about the modalities of this gradual approach. I can suggest here, for instance, to invite civil society to the working group on prevention, or when we discuss an agenda item related to technical assistance. Other agenda items we can continue for the moment to have as a closed session. I would like to underline once more that in the view of the Netherlands, in accordance with the rules of procedure, at the end of this process, civil society should be welcome at all plenary meetings of the working groups and the IRG. Fighting corruption is a complex, multifaceted task, which cannot be left to governments alone. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
أشكر ممثل فنزويلا على بيانه وأعطي الكلمة الآن.
I thank the representative of the Netherlands, and I now give the floor to South Africa, speaking on behalf of the African Group.
Thank you, Mr. President, for affording the African Group the opportunity to speak on this item. Mr. President, the African Group would like to reaffirm Resolution 3.1, entitled Mechanism for Review of Implementation of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, that established the review mechanism of the Convention in 2009. The group reiterates that the purpose of the review mechanism is to assist state parties in the effective implementation of the Convention by identifying challenges and good practices and to consider technical assistance requirements in order to ensure effective implementation of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. The group wishes to emphasize the need to uphold all the principles and characteristics of the review mechanism, in particular that it should be transparent, efficient, non-intrusive, inclusive, and impartial, and should not produce any form of ranking. The African Group would like to reiterate the necessity to preserve the intergovernmental character of the mechanism. In this regard, the African Group welcomes the compromise reached during the 4th session of the Conference of State Parties held in Marrakesh, Morocco, contained in Resolution 4/6, entitled The Non-Governmental Organizations and the Mechanism for the Review of Implementation of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. I thank you.
شكرا.
I thank you. Before I give the floor to Norway, I would just like to remind delegates that we are to close the list of speakers at 4:30 p.m. those delegates who would like to take the floor in this debate are kindly asked to sign up on the speakers list with the Secretariat before 16:30. I'd also like to recall to delegates that there is a rather long list of speakers, and so I would request that all speakers keep to the speaking time of 5 minutes, please. And now I'd like to call Norway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me at the outset refer to the intervention by the European Union to which we were aligned, and also to the intervention by the distinguished representative of Finland, in which many positive aspects of civil society participation were mentioned and where concrete proposals were presented. We hope that these can be discussed and regarded. Let me also refer to the intervention by the distinguished representative of the Netherlands, whose points of view we share. Civil society participation is at the core of UNCAC. There are mandatory provisions in UNCAC to secure civil society participation, such as Article 13. Article 13 and several other articles cannot be effectively implemented without civil society participation. Civil society participation is, first of all, a principal matter as stated by the Convention. Civil society participation and contribution is also a more effective way to implement the Convention. We align ourselves with the UNCAC review transparency pledge that has been presented during these days. If we are to fight corruption effectively, all parties have to show political will, not only to fight corruption at national or local level, but also will to cooperate internationally to fulfill the aims and objectives of the UNCAC. That requires willingness to openness and transparency. Unfortunately, we do not see sufficient willingness to openness by all state parties to the Convention. That is a concern. We also see a discrepancy between what is said by some states in this room and what is said by the same states in the intergovernmental negotiations in the rooms next door. We even see tendencies by the Secretariat to limit NGO relevant presence here at COSP, and even a practice of clearing documents to be distributed by the NGOs. These practices are not in line with the UN rule and regulation and need to come to an end. We should allow for participation of NGOs and non-state actors as observers both at the meetings of the state parties as well as the implementation review group and in the subsidiary bodies of the Convention. The rules of procedure, the Convention itself and ECOSOC rules provide for that. We are well aware of the fact that not all participating states share our view, but we hope to reach increased understanding for the value of involving the knowledge, expertise and views of both public and private partners, relevant national, regional and international organizations, development organizations and NGOs. Only if we are willing to show inclusiveness and having an open mind, we will get the best result. We should not be blind. Our aim should be to fight corruption, not to fight civil society participation in our processes, both intergovernmental and on national level. We need the NGOs and an independent and active civil society to help state parties ensure the effective implementation of the Convention. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
أشكر ممثل النرويج وأعطي الكلمة الآن إلى ممثل ألمانيا.
Thank you, Norway. I now give the floor to Germany.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can be very brief. Germany supports and fully and aligns itself with the statement made by the European Union. Secondly, we consider transparency and public participation absolutely vital and necessary elements in our common fight against corruption. Thirdly, we therefore are in favor of the engagement of civil society in the implementation of the Convention Against Corruption. And we call upon all state parties to find pragmatic ways in order to ensure the participation of non-governmental organizations in all mechanisms and bodies of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. And finally, we are very grateful to Finland for the paper on the civil society engagement in the implementation of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. We consider it a particularly substantive and important contribution. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
أشكر ممثل ألمانيا على بيانه وأعطي.
I thank the representative of Germany. And the next speaker is Bolivia.
Thank you, Chairman. We have carefully listened to participations regarding the challenges of the review mechanism for states parties, and we agree that this is a process which is constantly changing and one that we constantly learn from. We believe that the mechanism helps improve and transform the way states parties combat corruption, adopting homogeneous recommendations for states with the essential and indispensable participation of civil society. However, we should also consider that within the mechanism, there are some states that believe that NGO participation is a need, and there are other states parties, such as the plurinational state of Bolivia, who believe that this participation of civil society and social movements to be important, but we don't agree with the participation of NGOs. Therefore, Chairman, Bolivia does not agree with considering the participation of NGOs in the mechanism as requested by some NGOs in their statements. They're not on the same level as states parties. As Venezuela and other countries have said, this is an intergovernmental mechanism. We believe in the review mechanism of the convention. The contrary would be an invasion of the principles of self-determination and sovereignty, which some of us have within the convention with regards to the participation of NGOs. Thank you.
أشكر ممثل بوليفيا على بيانه.
I thank the representative of Bolivia. And I now call Niger.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. It's the first time that I have taken the floor, and so on behalf of the delegation of Niger, we'd like to express our solidarity with the Russian people who are grieving following the plane crash at the weekend. I'm taking the floor as the chair of the anti-corruption body in my country, Niger, but also as head of the anti-corruption agencies of the ECOWAS community, which has been in existence now for some 5 years. And goodness, in our community space, our community area, the network we've established between anti-corruption bodies has a very good relationship with all stakeholders. in the struggle against corruption, and I would like to highlight in particular that our network of anti-corruption bodies is active, ensuring cooperation between states and civil society. We would like to mention the priorities for our network to ensure interstate protection between member states, to carry out capacity building for member states, to assist those who have not yet made measures and encourage them to do so, to harmonize legislation, administrative regulations and other regulations for the proper functioning of the network, to exchange experience and tools and approaches, to harmonize them so that we have good cooperation between our member states, to exchange experience and to facilitate coordination, to identify and implement any other objectives identified by members, and also to facilitate implementation of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. I would like to demonstrate the efforts that West African states have done to make anti-corruption measures a reality, and I'd like to highlight the importance of our partnership with UNODC. I want to underscore this here because UNODC has been a driving force behind our network and the dynamic nature of our network. And we should also mention our partners as well, Interpol, the African Development Bank, and also civil society organizations. This year, which is coming to a close, we have been working actively in the community area. The Anti-Corruption Bodies Network has conducted a series of important events I'd like to share with you now. We started to carry out training programs in African universities in French-speaking countries, and the universities have been very receptive and enthusiastic about this partnership. In June 2015 in Doha, with the support of Qatar, some 30 academics from French-speaking universities in Africa were able to learn about the contents of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, and with a view to introducing modules into the university curricula in Western African universities. This project should come to fruition in a few months' time, and I would mention the Nigeria UNFC, which has provided precious cooperation to establish events, and we had the first capacity building session for anti-corruption officials in our community space took place under the auspices of this institution, and all of the member states were able to send 3 participants for a capacity building training program. The network intends to encourage those states who have not yet established anti-corruption agencies to do so. The network would express its solidarity with the African Group's statement on cooperation with NGOs. The network allows us to express our position in the ECOWAS area, and we'd like to express our opinion on asset recovery. Our network is particularly concerned about the nonchalance we've seen in the procedures relating to Nigeria's assets, and we'd like to see the repatriation of their assets that would show us that the combat we're engaged in is sincere and useful. So that is all I wanted to say at this point in time, just to say that international cooperation in the Western African area is very healthy indeed, and we are fully in line with the statement made by the African Group. Thank you. I thank the representative of Niger for that statement, and I now call the representative of Peru, who is to take the floor on behalf of Honduras, Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Peru.
Thank you, Chairman. As you said, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the delegations of Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, and my own delegation, Peru. Chairman, we express our concern about the serious nature of the problems and threats posed by corruption for the stability and security of society, undermining democratic institutions and values, ethical values and justice, threatening sustainable development and the rule of law. We're all affected by corruption, and we should act united to combat it. This has to be a joint effort by governments and citizens, state authorities, and society. We acknowledge and we support the valuable contributions made by civil society, non-governmental organizations, and community organizations in preventing and combating corruption. We acknowledge that the opinions of people and groups outside the public sector complete the views of civil servants, and that their points of view can help us develop a better understanding of the challenges of corruption we are facing. In this sense, we call for the participation of competent non-governmental organizations as observers at all future meetings of the Working Group for Prevention and the Working Group on Asset Recovery established by the Conference of States Parties. We invite them to share their points of view and ideas with us, as this will enrich our debates. We are convinced that our fight against corruption will be more effective with the active support and participation of all stakeholders, including civil society. Thank you.
I thank Peru for that statement, and I now call Lebanon.
Mr. Chairman, my country, Lebanon, would like to re-emphasize its position in support of an increased engagement and participation of Parliament and civil society, both domestically in Lebanon and internationally in the context of the UNCAC. We particularly support the improved participation of civil society organizations as observers in the UNCAC subsidiary bodies. Such increased participation must happen in whichever format, including in the incremental step-by-step approach suggested by Finland. At regional level, Lebanon had also led and participated into the Arab Anti-Corruption and Integrity Network, ACNet, for increased cooperation, development of capacities, and effectiveness in fighting corruption. For this reason, we recommend enhancing engagements with ACNet as well as with similar networks in other regions. At domestic level, Lebanon shall make publicly available the self-assessment and the full country report, together with the executive summary, as already stated by our delegation, the opening of this conference. We will also organize parliamentary and civil society briefings and public debates about the findings of this report. Lebanon also commits to collaborate with all states to make the review process more transparent and participative with all concerned stakeholders, including parliaments, parliamentarians, and civil society. Given the especially important role of parliaments and parliamentarians in support of the UNCAC implementation, through oversight functions, which can be effective in the cases of grand corruption, Lebanon has included a parliamentary representative in its official delegation. We hope that such practice may become more common as a means for increased engagement of people's constitutional representative in those international proceedings. Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, we'd like to put forward two ideas which we hope could advance the dialogue and the cause for an increased participation of civil society. First, the Universal Periodic Review of Human Rights, a similar process to the one applicable to UNCAC, has been implementing over several years now a very strong role of civil society organization in that UPR review on very important political issues, with no major issues raised on such participation by the very state members of UNCAC. Lessons may be drawn from these practices. Second, to illustrate the importance of continuous participation of the people in all matters related to public interest, allow me to paraphrase Clemenceau in saying that politics, including preventing and fighting corruption, is too important to leave it up to politicians or governments alone. Thank you.
أشكر ممثل لبنان على بيانه وأعطي.
I thank the delegate of Lebanon, and I now give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My delegation is pleased to participate in today's much anticipated debate on the important topic of how this conference can best support the proper implementation of Article 63, particularly with regard to cooperation with international and regional organizations and mechanisms, and with non-governmental organizations. We welcome the analysis and the balanced approach that was taken in the conference paper provided by Finland. We think this is an excellent document and certainly sets the stage for a helpful discussion today. In our view, Mr. Chair, this conversation is long overdue. Since 2010, following the establishment of the review mechanism, the Conference of States Parties has lived under the shadow of an intractable dispute over the interpretation of the rules of procedure and over the participation of civil society in the subsidiary bodies of the COSP. This shadow, in our view, Mr. Chair, is limiting our potential progress within the UNCAC and could also undermine confidence in the substantive and technical focus of other Vienna-based negotiations on criminal justice and law enforcement policy. It is time for us to move beyond this argument, to find new ways of working together to achieve the objectives of the Convention, and fulfilling and embracing our Article 63 mandates. It is time for us to move beyond the fear that civil society might expose government inadequacies and focus instead on gathering facts that help provide a true picture of the role of civil society in the full spectrum of anti-corruption efforts. As states parties, we need to hear the feedback of those outside government, to evaluate the input they provide and to use it to inform the development of government strategies. In an age of drastic budget cuts, civil society can also be a critical resource multiplier for government agencies. The conversation needs to shift from how can civil society hurt us to how can civil society help us. It will take all of us, both inside governments and outside of them, to achieve the objectives of the Convention. And those who negotiated the UNCAC knew this. This is why Article 63, Section 4B, places cooperation with international, regional, and non-governmental organizations on the same level of importance as review of implementation in Section 4E, as the identification of technical assistance needs in Section 4G, and sharing of information and successful practices for combating corruption and returning proceeds of crime, Section 4A. When our delegation thinks about the energy that this COSP has put behind review of implementation, sharing best practices, identifying technical assistance needs over the last 5 years, we are amazed. Our accomplishments are rather remarkable. But when we turn to Article 63, Section 4B, where engagement with civil society and international organizations is listed next to all of these parallel priorities, we cannot help but think that the conference has yet to realize its full potential with regard to this obligation. The good news is that we now have a growing track record that helps us move forward, and many of these ideas are highlighted in the conference room paper for this discussion. For example, A vast majority of states parties recognize on some level that civil society input can be helpful in promoting implementation of the convention. This is evident by the high number of governments that have engaged with civil society during their first cycle peer reviews. In addition, a majority of states parties also participate in at least one other multilateral anti-corruption treaty review process, where interaction with civil society is routine. Third, we have now spent several years successfully implementing the 2011 compromise made in Marrakesh, which allowed for international and regional organizations to observe the IRG's proceedings and established a briefing for non-governmental observers on the margins of the IRG sessions. Finally, we are also looking towards the second review cycle this week, which is presumed to include a focus on prevention. And Mr. Chair, we look forward to launching that cycle here in St. Petersburg. This chapter on prevention specifically highlights the role of the private sector and of civil society. This is a particular opportunity for us to take a next step forward in learning from those parts of our society as part of our UNCAC deliberations. In this context, Mr. Chair, as we turn our attention to the second cycle, the United States is proud to have joined the pledge issued by Transparency International regarding the review mechanism's second cycle, namely to publish updated review cycles for our country review, to share information about the focal points for our second cycle review, to publicly release our self-assessment checklist and full country report, and to announce the completion of our country review when it is finalized, and to organize public briefings on the report's findings. Mr. Chair, we continue to support the compromise established in Marrakesh via Resolution 4/6. The NGO briefings have been a necessary step towards exchanging views between observers and governments, but they are only a start and not the end of this process. We call on states parties to build on this practice and to move dialogue with civil society to the next level. And we are very open to creative ideas on how to accomplish this goal. As some states parties have mentioned, the practice of the NGO briefing could be extended to other UNCAC working groups. Another option might be to request the Secretariat, with notice to the Extended Bureau, to permit the identification of non-governmental observer, non-governmental organization, private sector, and academic experts to participate as panelists in working group agenda items where they have expertise. We recognize that some conversations are sensitive. We recognize that some conversations are sensitive and need to remain intergovernmental in nature. We can certainly find a solution that respects the balance between privacy to allow governments to speak in confidence and the public discourse that will make our work more dynamic and fruitful. But the presumption of this conference and its subsidiary bodies should be that we need more voices, not fewer. We need all potential expertise at the table, not just some of it. And we need to build confidence between all sides of this debate, because the real enemies are the corrupt actors outside these walls, not people in this room who are here because they want to end impunity and raise our global standards against corruption. Mr. Chair, we can no longer presume that governments are the only source of information when it comes to how to prevent a bribe, how to identify a public official who is abusing his or her position, how to create strong domestic laws, or how to respond to the criminal exploitation of commercial industries, financial systems, and the labor force. This will require a gradual process with a substantial amount of confidence-building measures. And for this reason, it is our view that this agenda item is the beginning and not the end of a very important conversation. Therefore, in accordance with Rule 8 of the Rules of Procedure, we propose to include this topic as a standing agenda item during future sessions of the conference, using the same wording as agreed during the negotiations that led to Agenda Item 7 of this 6th session. We stand ready to work with all interested states parties towards progress in this area and to use this agenda item to exchange future views on this subject. We have nothing to fear if we are committed to the effective implementation of all aspects of this convention, including those contained in Article 63. These two, Mr. Chairman, are essential obligations that merit our time, attention, and energy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the United States, and now I give the floor to Jordan.
شكرا سيد الرئيس for this opportunity to discuss ways and means to enhance the cooperation with relevant international and regional organizations and mechanisms and NGOs. Mr. Chairperson, the multidimensional aspects of corruption warrant a holistic approach that involves all stakeholders. This, in turn, will provide coordination and information sharing while avoiding overlap, thus ensuring effective implementation of the obligations under UNCAC. In other words, establishing and implementing synergies between and among instruments that involve reporting obligations would lead to greater efficacy and minimize the burden and fatigue that states may face. In terms of NGOs, UNCAC underscored the importance of NGOs' support and involvement in the prevention and eradication of corruption. This has also been reaffirmed and reflected in the constructive participation and engagement of the civil society and NGOs in the national processes of setting up the normative and institutional framework relating to countering corruption. Undeniably, it's incumbent upon member states to implement treaty obligations, yet NGOs can and should play a supportive and assistive role. As for the participation of NGOs in subsidiary bodies, it's important to identify ways to enhance such participation in an incremental manner, such as delivering statements on behalf of a group of NGOs, submitting written statements, and possibly attendance without taking the floor or participation. That said, the relevance and credentials of NGOs should be commensurate with the subject matter and the mandate of any given subsidiary body. Finally, Jordan greatly values the important role of the civil society and NGOs at the national level and looks forward to an enhanced cooperation. شكرا سيد الرئيس.
I thank Jordan for their statement, and before I give the floor to Belgium, I would like to remind you that the speakers list is now closed. And I now give the floor to the representative of Belgium.
And thank you for giving me the floor. My delegation would like to align itself with the declaration of the European Union and welcomes the Finnish conference room paper on civil society engagement in the implementation of the UN Convention Against Corruption. Belgium favors the involvement of civil society in the framework of the UNCAC Convention, including in its subsidiary bodies, and considers to sign up to the Transparency Pledge as launched by the UNCAC Coalition. Allow me to point out as well that my delegation also launched a conference room paper, CRP 7, with proposals to explore synergies between the secretariats of multilateral instruments in the field of anti-corruption and to avoid duplication of work. We hope that the lessons learned of the first cycle, together with relevant recommendations of practitioners of the open-ended working group on international cooperation in this regard, will be applied in the framework of the second review cycle. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank Belgium for the statement, and I now give the floor to Slovakia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As our delegation is speaking the first time in the plenary, we would like to thank Russian government for the hospitality and excellent organization of the meeting, including the splendid cultural event yesterday evening. At the same time, we would like to express our deepest condolences for the tragic loss in the airplane crash last week. We align ourselves with the EU statement, but we would also like to add a few words in our national capacity. We also thank Finland for the very useful conference paper and for the constructive ideas and proposals. An important place in implementing anti-corruption activities in Slovakia belongs to non-governmental organizations which have participated in drafting of the national program of fighting corruption. They play an important role in various aspects of the fight against corruption, inter alia in monitoring, education, conducting analysis and expertise, and they also support positive steps in the area of fight against corruption. NGOs and the whole civil society, together with media, play an important control role in the area of corruption, not only at the national, but also on regional and local levels. We agree with the Dutch delegation that there is no contradiction between the intergovernmental character of UNCAC and the involvement of the civil society. We are fully aware of the role and responsibility of governments. On the other hand, we support broader participation of NGOs in the Conference of the State Parties and its subsidiary bodies. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the delegate of Slovakia for that statement, and I now give the floor to Switzerland.
And as this will probably be the last time that I will be speaking, I want to say thank you for the wonderful hospitality you could enjoy here in St. Petersburg. The participation of civil society in the fight against corruption and the role of international and non-governmental organizations in intergovernmental processes has given rise to many controversies among the states parties. It is therefore timely that the conference addresses the topic and considers how we can structure our debate with other mechanisms and organizations, including NGOs. According to the Convention, the prevention and eradication of corruption is a responsibility of all states, yet to be effective, like the distinguished delegate from the Lebanon indicated, these efforts require the support and involvement of civil society. Switzerland is encouraged to see that in many states parties, dialogue and a very constructive cooperation between NGO and anti-corruption authorities were established. However, we also note that NGOs elsewhere find it hard to work effectively and cooperate with governments. And we have seen that sometimes exactly in some of those countries where the voice of the people, those affected by corruption, are not allowed to be heard at all. The fight against those, due to the fact that corruption is still regarded as a highly sensitive issue in many countries. And sometimes the rallying cry of a mass movement is exactly the one that brings down the government, as we have seen in the past. It's best when such confrontation can be avoided, when groups of people exercising their freedom of association and their freedom of speech form and register NGOs in accordance with domestic legislation. with the objective of preventing and fighting corruption. Then the government should regard this not as a challenge, but as a sign of constructive interest in public affairs. Governments interested in good governance should therefore be keen to engage in a dialogue with NGOs early on and on a permanent basis. From a political perspective, it seems wise to seek their advice and support, and from a legal perspective, under Article 13 of the Convention, we are all supposed and called upon to promote the active participation of civil society, NGOs, and community-based organizations in our anti-corruption efforts. Mr. President, we hold the view that what applies to individual states, parties, should also apply to states parties collectively when they are assembled in the conference or in working groups and other bodies established by the conference. Since the Convention requires active participations of society, we do not understand why observer status has not been granted to NGOs which applied for observer status in the intergovernmental working groups. Like for the Netherlands, as we heard some moments ago, the word intergovernmental in our interpretation refers to the membership of those working groups, but it does not exclude the according of observer status to NGOs in conformity with our own rules of procedure. We are convinced that civil society, the private sector, and scientific community can make essential contributions to our collective deliberations on anti-corruption issues. Precisely because they are non-governmental, that is, their points of view will be complementary to those of government officials. By sharing their different perspectives, they will help us gain a better understanding of the problems that we want to solve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the representative of Switzerland for the statement. And now I give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I would like to remind this conference that at the 5th Conference of States Parties in Panama in November 2013, Mexico supported the effort to include the question of including NGOs in mechanisms established by the Convention. I would like to underscore that Mexico understands that an anti-corruption policy is a whole which involves not just a self-regulatory action by the state through the establishment and adoption of behavior patterns that can be evaluated over time. And as part of this conference, which establishes a review mechanism, but also as a way of satisfying society, who is the benefactor of the state. So issuing an opinion on the effectiveness of the work of the state in combating corruption in terms of access to information and transparency and open governance. In this sense, Vice Chairman, Mexico hopes that non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, and other relevant actors will participate in the review group as well as in the working groups on prevention, asset recovery, and international cooperation as established by the Conference of States Parties. I would like to underscore that my country has learnt a lot by working in an open and transparent way with civil society organizations and with the private sector on subjects related to preventing and combating corruption. We would like to highlight the importance of the participation of civil society organizations and the private sector throughout the review process for Mexico in the implementation of the Merida Conference and also in the visit received by Azerbaijan and Peru, the evaluating countries, in August 2013. We would also like to say that in an endeavor at transparency, the government of Mexico committed to, once we have the national report, this national report will be shared with both aforementioned sectors. Vice Chairman, Mexico believes that the participation of civil society and the private sector should be extended to the working groups and conferences of the parties on the understanding that this is the same position our country maintained at the 5th conference and in Panama in 2013. Chairman, several of the delegations that have taken the floor before us also referred to the commitment to transparency at international level. Mexico has no hesitation in supporting the 6 points of this commitment because we believe this is the only way to have better information and to provide better information to our citizens who receive our services. Thank you.
Would like to thank the representative of Mexico. Now give the floor to Italy.
We fully align ourselves with the statement made by the European Union, and we would like to make some remarks in our national capacity. We believe we should significantly strengthen the participation of civil society organizations as observers in the work of all subsidiary bodies of the Conference of the States Parties. In light of the lessons learned during the implementation of the UNCAC over the past years, NGOs and the private sector play a crucial role, in particular in preventing corruption. Therefore, their contribution for the second review cycle for the COSP will be extremely relevant. In this regard, we thank Finland for a very constructive and pragmatic contribution for our debate contained in Conference Room Paper number 3. We seize this opportunity to encourage Member States to support the UNCAC Review Transparency Pledge that contains some very constructive and pragmatic actions for the second review cycle proposed by the UNCAC Coalition, which is a global network of over 350 civil society organizations in 100 countries. And this gives an idea of the magnitude and of the evident added value of all these ideas and contributions that are summarized in this very constructive pledge. Italy subscribes the pledge, and so we do hope that also other member states will support this proposal. A last point, we would strongly support the proposal of having a standing agenda item as today in the next sessions of the Conference of the State Parties on this very important issue. Thanks.
Would like to thank the representative of Italy. Now give the floor to the Ecuador.
Gracias.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. We have listened carefully to the different statements, and we agree with Finland when they say there are many points in common. And one of those is the urgent need for the participation of citizens in combating corruption. For the state of Ecuador, the people are the primary agent of oversight of public power as they exercise their right to participation. I said this in my first statement, and this is enshrined in our constitution and approved by the people of Ecuador in October 2008. The participation of citizens in all affairs of public interest is, as I said before, a right, and this right is exercised through the mechanisms of representative democracy, direct and community democracy. And the Constitution of Ecuador established transparency and oversight and a special institution, the Council of Citizens' Participation and Social Oversight. And its role is to promote the role of citizens and combat corruption directly. The power of citizens is a result of the process of the participation of individuals and groups of citizens who have a leading role in decision-making as well as in the planning and management of all public affairs as well as in social oversight at all levels of government. We believe that civil society, as well as different forms of partnerships and groups, should guarantee that civil society has democracy, that there should be changeovers, that there should be accountability to society and to members of the organization itself, and that they should respect existing regulations. There are essential elements to participation, for example, the popular initiative revoking mandates through a popular vote, social oversight, observatories, free access to information, the empty chair policy, public hearings, and the obligation of all institutions who use public or private resources to be permanently accountable. This is proof of a society and a path towards transparency. However, Chairman, my country would like to reiterate the importance of the fundamental principles of the review mechanism for the implementation of the Convention in full conformity with Resolution 3/1, which says that this process should be transparent, efficient, impartial, and it should be governmental in nature. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the representative of Ecuador. And before giving the floor to the representative of El Salvador, I would like to remind you once again that the list is already a long one. And therefore, I call upon the esteemed delegates who take the floor to observe the 5-minute rule, please. Salvador, the floor is yours.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. I will be very brief. Please allow me to say that El Salvador, alongside other countries, proposed the inclusion of an agenda item on the participation of NGOs in our works at our last meeting, and therefore we welcome the opportunity to participate this time. The process of consolidating the rule of law in El Salvador has shown us that this is only possible through sustained and organized participation of civil society. For that reason, my country joins other delegations who support the participation of civil society as observers to the works of the subsidiary bodies of the Convention. We believe that their participation would strengthen the spirit of the Convention. In Article 13, This expressly contemplates that the participation of civil society in preventing and combating corruption has an important role. Therefore, Article 63 of the Convention establishes that the conference will agree on activities, procedures, and working methods to achieve the goals of UNCAC, including cooperation with organizations and international mechanisms, regional mechanisms, as well as the relevant non-governmental organizations. In accordance with Resolution 4/6, we call for continued constructive dialogue to strengthen the participation of NGOs. In this way, we will be complying effectively with the mandate granted to this conference. Mr. Chairman, we would like to welcome the document presented by Finland. In our opinion, it contains very valuable elements that could become a reference in this dialogue. My delegation is open to proposals on this subject, and we hope that we will achieve positive results because we are convinced that civil society has an important role to play in achieving the goals of the Convention. Thank you.
Now I give the floor to Representative Cuba.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chairman. With regards to the debate today, my delegation has the following comments to make. In our national experience fighting corruption and in the review mechanism in the first cycle, Cuba promoted and promotes the active participation of civil society organizations at national level. This is a daily and necessary practice for our country in this process and in other processes of interest to citizens. We believe that each state party has the sovereign right to define how its civil society organizations will participate both in the review process and in preventing and combating corruption in general. And we support the statements made by Bolivia, Venezuela, and Ecuador. With regards to the involvement of NGOs in the groups, the working groups on the review mechanism for the implementation, we believe that we should respect the principles of that, especially its intergovernmental nature. We should properly respect Resolution 4/6 adopted by the Conference of the Parties in Marrakesh, and we don't support any amendments to its implementation. Both the conference and its review mechanism are instruments of the states parties who have the responsibility and the right to implement them and defend them. We don't think it is necessary to repeat this debate in the future as a permanent item on the agenda. I would request the Secretariat to take due note of this stance as well as including the diversity of criteria in the minutes. Thank you.
Now I give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Brazilian delegation would like to reiterate its support for the participation of civil society in the framework of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, as expressed by our delegation during the general debates. Article 13 of the Convention recognizes the importance of promoting and I quote, active participation of individuals and groups outside of the public sector, such as civil society, non-governmental organizations, and community-based organizations in the prevention and fight against corruption, end of quote. The data from the Secretariat report and the lessons learned from the first cycle of reviews show some very positive trends of inclusion of civil societies in on-site visits and other activities, but there is still room for improvement when it comes to being ambitious and including different actors in anti-corruption efforts. It is important that these trends and ideas on how to collectively address the challenges to prevent and combat corruption become the practice, in particular at the national level. As one of the founding members of the Open Government Partnership, Brazil has witnessed upfront the positive results of the collaborations between governments and civil society to formulate innovative solutions for the governance challenges all of our countries face. It is essential that the UNCAC, as the most innovative and the global legally binding anti-corruption instrument, also benefits from more modern structures of collaboration among relevant stakeholders. The terms of reference for the UNCAC review mechanism encourages states parties to facilitate engagement with all relevant national stakeholders in the course of a country visit. Brazil considers that this provision of the terms of reference should be considered also a reference for all projects and initiatives against corruption that a country develops. In the case of the review mechanism, the Brazil delegation is, as usual, willing to work with other state parties on concrete proposals to advance in the dialogue with civil society and other actors in a manner that allows us to build bridges on this issue, while taking into due consideration all aspects that have already been discussed at various occasions. In that context, Brazil considers that it is important to engage in an open dialogue that allows for a consensus solution among states parties about the possible forms of participation of civil society under the UNCAC's framework. We would like to recall in that regard Brazil's very concrete proposal at the resumed third session of the Implementation Review Group held in November 2012 to request that the Secretariat worked with the focal points of states, parties and permanent missions to ensure that a more diverse range of organizations could be invited to the fifth session of the Conference of States Parties in Panama. The objective of that proposal was to achieve a broader participation of relevant non-governmental organizations at the briefings held after the fifth session of the conference. This goes to show that it is possible to work together towards more inclusiveness in the review mechanism, and that the Conference of States Parties and the Implementation Review Mechanism of the UNCAC already present a framework and an enormous potential for great participation of civil society and other stakeholders. Therefore, the Brazilian delegation would like to express its appreciation for the inclusion of agenda item number 7 on the agenda of this session of the conference, and for continuing to promote the debate around this important topic. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I now give the floor to the representative of Indonesia.
Shukran, Syed Rais. Thank you for giving me the floor. After having listened the previous interventions, Indonesia recognizes the merit of collaborations and partnerships between the state parties with relevant international and regional organizations, including with relevant civil society and non-governmental organizations in achieving the objective of the conventions and in the review implementation process. And in our experience, Mr. President, at the national level, indeed the participations of civil society in the implementations of the convention is fully guaranteed under the law number 13, year 1999 on combating corruption. And indeed this law has been further elaborated in the government regulations number 71, year 2000 on procedures of the implementations of society participations and reward distributions for preventing and combating corruption. However, Mr. President, in the context of the review implementations of the convention, Indonesia would like to underscore once again that state parties should fully respect our own decision as reflected in the agreed terms of reference on the mechanism for review implementations of the convention. Under the terms of reference, in particular Article 4, it is clearly stated that the review mechanism shall be an intergovernmental process, which means it can only be conducted and participated by states. But, Mr. President, I think it's also a fact that up to this 6th Conference of State Parties, especially during the plenary sessions and general discussions, as well as during the side events, I think we already allocated ample time and given wider participations of representatives of the civil society, academics, parliamentarians, to express their voices and concerns about the convention. And I think all state parties have been listened attentively to their deliberations. Mr. President, Indonesia again supports the terms of reference of the mechanisms of the review implementations of the convention as the basis for the review process at the current and the next review cycle. Indeed, Indonesia is not allergic to civil society participation, and on the contrary, with the enactment of these government regulations is actually part of our commitment and in transparency and accountability in the process of the implementations of the conventions at the national level. I thank you, Mr. President.
Now I'll give the floor to a representative of Nicaragua.
Señor Presidente.
Chairman, we are convinced that the review mechanism is indispensable for complying with the convention and that the participation of civil society and citizens is essential in achieving the goals of the Merida Convention and the CELAC Convention. We also believe that we have to work on the elements we have in common, as pointed out by Finland, because they represent important elements for progress without long deliberations at our meetings. Some sectors say they represent civil society as though it was a trademark. Then we need to consider comments made by other countries that have taken the floor. We do agree that we have to work on the mechanisms established by the Convention and the Marrakesh resolutions, which we approved, to continue to ascertain what NGOs, civil society, who are transparent stakeholders in this joint endeavor. For Nicaragua, it is important to have public participation and the participation of citizens in our pursuit of development. And we need to pursue joint objectives according to Article 63, 3E, working with relevant NGOs and not transnational organizations or corporations which are not committed either because of their sources of funding or because of the way they draw up their indicators. It would just not be beneficial to us. It seems that some who insist don't respect the words that I have just pronounced. So we adhere to what the delegation of Ecuador, Bolivia, Cuba, and Brazil have said about working under the aforementioned modalities. Thank you.
Now give the floor to Representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To make my statement shorter, I would first like to align with the statement of the European Union and support the elements expressed in conference room paper of Finland, as well as very many statements in support of participation of NGO in subsidiary bodies of COSP UNCAC. We do understand that we have to take into account the views of all. So we are convinced that the proposed gradual approach will help us in this. And this gradual approach asks us for continuation of the positive dialogue we have today, also in the future, including in the next COSP sessions, as US and Italy also proposed. Slovenia believes that transparency is extremely important in our fight against corruption. To this end, we are making available our country review report on the website for others to learn from our mistakes or take the positive lessons learned, including cooperation with the NGOs. We are also strongly considering the signing of the Review Transparency Pledge. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we can also be brief in aligning ourselves with the statement of the European Union, and to thank also Finland for the paper that it produced. It was been very useful and a very informative document to inform this discussion. Mr. Chair, since the inception of this convention, the UK has been of the firm belief that the participation of civil society is an indispensable and critical element of the implementation of the provisions contained in the Corruption Convention. For this reason, we were heartened to hear of the many countries that have already included civil society in the completion of their country reviews. Civil society provides much needed expertise and experience in a wide range of related issues and helps to improve the quality and accuracy of our responses, as well as holding us to account. We are interested in and supportive of the US proposals to strengthen NGO participation, including the practice of conducting NGO briefings, having NGOs participate as panelists in some of the debates, and in particular creating a standing agenda item on the NGOs at this conference of parties. The UK is also proud to announce our alignment to the UNCAC Coalition's pledge, and we commit to implementing the 6 demands contained therein in the course of the second review cycle. Mr. Chair, we agree with the many other speakers who have said that this is a sensitive issue. We believe that it is a regular part of the work of the UN Conference of Parties of many issues to facilitate member states' discussions on sensitive issues, and this is a function that they fulfill in many subjects, many of which are equally as sensitive as counter-corruption. We believe that we can only build a strong and effective review mechanism for this convention if we ensure that it is as comprehensive and transparent and inclusive as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Now I give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Спасибо, господин председатель. Добрый день.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Is one that sees vital importance in the participation of the civil society in combating corruption. Furthermore, it's impossible to speak about a comprehensive, real, and substantive fight against corruption without the participation of civil society. And this participation contributes to transparency and its wide nature. What is more, I would like to assure you and share with you some experience we have in Israel, that important role that mass media plays in disclosing massive and major corruption affairs is incomparable. No doubt that NGOs have a key role in civil society as well. and I would like to draw your attention that, as suggested by the Israeli delegation during this conference, we should also use ITC to facilitate the civil society's participation in combating corruption. Thank you very much.
أعطي الكلمة الآن لوفد فرنسا.
I now call France. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, my delegation considers that civil society, and in particular NGOs, are precious allies to combat criminal phenomena, including corruption in particular, as they are our partners and they can assist us in prevention, in detection, in training activities, in mobilization of society and awareness raising amongst society about corruption. Our convention, quite rightly, contains several articles on the participation of NGOs in combating corruption and on cooperation with these organizations, Articles 13 and 63 in particular. So my delegation supports an approach to combating corruption which includes the participation of associations and organizations. As we indicated during the general debate, French law gives associations the possibility to be civil parties, third parties in corruption cases, and they play a useful role in particular in cases of the misappropriation of assets and funds. My delegation fully aligns itself with the declaration of the European Union, in which several formulae were suggested for involving NGOs in the review mechanism and in the work of subsidiary bodies. Several flexible approaches have been proposed, which should help us to find a solution which can suit every delegation. My delegation would also like to thank the delegation of Finland for the very interesting conference paper that it has produced on this subject, which really is thought-provoking. Finally, Chairman, my delegation is delighted to announce that it subscribes to the pledge proposed by the UNCAC coalition to guarantee transparency under our convention for the second review cycle and the 6 principles contained in this document. Thank you.
أعطي الكلمة الآن لممثل مالي. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
And now call Mali. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, this will, I'm sure, be the last intervention of the delegation of Mali. We did not intend to speak on this matter, but as this is a highly relevant issue for us all, my delegation would also like to say a few words on the topic. I think that we are not fully understanding the reality of countries in the Southern Hemisphere. If we look at the French-speaking countries in Africa, we understand the situation of NGOs. They work with us. They're the same as us. They're involved. They are legal entities. They can address the courts and so on. Chairman, we think it really could be very simple, as I'm going to propose. So I very much hope that you'll like my rather simple proposal. On behalf of my delegation, I would like to say that we add our voices to several speakers who have spoken before us to say that corruption is an evil of many facets, and to combat it, to face this challenge, our work must involve civil society as provided for in this convention, so that they can support state parties. And this point should not lead to disagreement. We should not have divergent opinions here, as we have seen in the paper submitted by the representative of Finland, and I'd like to thank the delegation of Finland for all of the work done to prepare this document that we have before us. It is a very important and relevant document. However, Chairman, my delegation draws the attention of all delegates to the fact that we need to identify which NGOs we should involve. They must be experienced, they must be specialized in these matters. These NGOs could participate as observers and work in favor of transparency and efficiency, and that way we would not be in competition but work together. Chairman, thank you very much indeed for your kind attention. That was my simple proposal. Thank you.
أعطي الكلمة الآن لممثل كولومبيا.
I thank the representative of Mali. I now call Colombia.
Señor Presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, Colombia really values the contribution of civil society to combating corruption, as it legitimates the actions of the state and it contributes to constant improvement of institutions and public policies. In this sense, my country has promoted the creation of fora to encourage the participation of civil society. This has always been an active part of our action within the review mechanism. However, we should maintain the intergovernmental nature of the review group by encouraging contributions from civil society as other mechanisms do, for example, the follow-up mechanism for the implementation of the Inter-American Convention against Corruption under the Organization of American States. This mechanism has managed to generate a balance between transparency and confidentiality. Thank you, Chairman.
I give the floor to the President of Poland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Views of my delegation has been already expressed by a delegation of the European Union, so I would like to make a couple of brief additional remarks. Let me start by thanking delegation of Finland for preparing a conference room paper, which is a very useful set of views and ideas and should be given our due consideration. Mr. Chair, we would like to support those voices highlighting in particular the important role of the civil society in the UNCAC implementation review process. I believe that Poland represents a positive example of a good cooperation with civil society in the first cycle of the review. Civil society was actively involved in the review process from the beginning. It took part in preparation of self-assessment checklist, presented its comments and opinion that helped the authorities to identify gaps in the implementation of UNCAC. After the review, civil society, together with the authorities, had also discussed recommendations received in order to work out the best way of their implementation. Therefore, Poland believes that only joint efforts undertaken by public sector and civil society can result in the effective implementation of UNCAC. And the participation of civil society in the second cycle of the review is necessary to achieve the best possible results. In conclusion, I wish also, like some other delegation before me, recognize the importance of the transparency pledge paper presented by UNCAC coalition. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I give the floor now to the representative of Iran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, for giving me the floor. And my delegation would also like to thank the delegation of Finland for their CRP. It was very enlightening. I would like to begin by stressing on the importance of the valuable contributions of international organizations as well as relevant non-governmental organizations in preventing and countering corruption. My delegation believes that their inputs shall be properly taken into account by the state parties for the purpose of implementation of the Convention. As the Article 63(4)(c) of the Convention states, the Conference shall agree upon activities, procedures, and methods of work for cooperating with such organizations. We observe that the Conference developed its rules of procedure through which has pronounced itself on the procedures of such cooperation. Those procedures should be fully respected. My delegation also recognizes the important role of NGOs in fighting corruption in accordance with Article 13 of the Convention. Fight against corruption is a very delicate issue that needs to be followed with absolute care and cautious. At the same time, the review mechanism is an innovative step taken by the conference which needs to be guarded properly, especially its governmental nature. Since a number of delegations before me touched upon the resolution 4/6, I would like to express our view that briefings for NGOs, if properly grasped by all stakeholders, might be helpful. However, the contribution through the briefings, as well as the purpose of trust building that was anticipated, has not succeeded yet. It should also be reminded the structure of the review mechanism and its express provision on the governmental process that was the rationale behind organizing briefings at the margins of the IRG. Not all states have enough resources and means to examine the goals and activities of all foreign NGOs who apply to participate in the conference or are willing to participate in other processes. However, states parties are free to include their competent NGOs as advisors in their delegations in all sessions of the conference and its subsidiary bodies. My delegation did this in the past and invites other states to consider following a similar approach. I wish to conclude by stressing on the need to utilizing capacities and available expertise of the NGOs in appropriate formats and forums. For instance, we wish to express an important role of NGOs in provision of TA. However, we wish to be cautious about diverting resources necessary for building infrastructure and preventing and countering corruption to areas not enough sufficient. Thank you.
شكرا.
Thank you. I now call the last speaker from the member states. China has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased to be the last speaker on this issue. We have listened just now attentively to the different views expressed by different delegations. Our general impression is that state parties have very different views on this issue. I would like to briefly present the Chinese position on this issue. The Chinese government encourages all parts of the society to participate in anti-corruption work. And we also welcome various countries to act in accordance with their law and the national development situations to allow NGO to participate in their work. However, at the international level, although we respect the fact that the NGO has played positive roles in anti-corruption work, this, however, does not mean that we must include them into our intergovernmental process. IRG and its subsidiary bodies should strictly act in accordance with our agreement in allowing NGOs participation. The mandate of us, the term of reference has never left any spaces for their participation. We conducted very long negotiations on this issue in Marrakesh meetings and achieved a certain agreement. That is, we will provide briefings to NGOs during intersessional meetings. We have participated in some of these briefings. Frankly speaking, we were concerned about the representations of the NGOs who participated in these briefings. And we have
professional of some NGOs.
Therefore, we don't think it is a natural thing that the NGOs' participation will necessarily improve our work. In general, we believe that the agreement reached at Marrakesh conference is a joint agreement that we have reached. It's a consensus that we have reached.
I think it's necessary to change this consensus. Thank you.
أشكر ممثل الصين.
I thank China. I do apologize. I had forgotten to say that Algeria will also have the floor, so I now call the representative of Algeria.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, Algeria is aware that fighting corruption can only be fully expected and meet the objectives of the Convention if we work on our own as states. The input of civil society, skilled civil society, is vital for us to conduct this fight against corruption, in particular when we look at prevention. The Merida Convention provides, fortunately, for us to do so in relevant provisions. In the review process for the implementation of the Convention, we very much believe that we should have an intergovernmental process for the review as stipulated by the terms of reference. It is the same for subsidiary bodies. Finally, Chairman, it is our view that the modus vivendi found and agreed upon at the Marrakesh conference strikes the right balance on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I give now the floor to the representative of the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. You have the floor.
Mr. Chair, distinguished delegates, on behalf of the Secretariat of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, I would like to express my gratitude for this opportunity to address the 6th session of the Conference of State Parties to the UN Convention Against Corruption. Whereas most of the previous statements focused on the important role that civil society and NGOs can play, I will focus on another important aspect of Article 63, namely cooperation with relevant international and regional organizations. As it is the first time that I take the floor during this COSP, allow me also on behalf of the OSCE to express our sincerest condolences to the families and friends of those that lost their lives in the tragic airplane crash in Egypt last Saturday. I'm representing the OSCE, which is comprised of 57 participating states spanning North America, Europe and Asia. We have 11 partners for cooperation in the Asia-Pacific and Mediterranean regions. And we have a network of 14 field operations in addition to our headquarters in Vienna. We support security, prosperity and democracy throughout the OSCE region by combining a high-level political dialogue with practical, technical assistance to the participating states in a number of thematic areas. Corruption, weak governance and the lack of transparency and rule of law undermine economic growth and impede trust in public persons and in government institutions. Bribery and embezzlement of state resources deter domestic and foreign investments and deprive citizens of important public services. Unchecked, corruption can provoke social unrest, fuel insecurity, and even lead to armed confrontation. Therefore, the promotion of good governance and transparency and the fight against corruption are integral parts of the OSCE's mandate to build and support a comprehensive approach to security. This mandate is well reflected in a number of recently adopted documents, the 2012 Dublin Declaration on Strengthening Good Governance and Combating Corruption, Money Laundering and the Financing of Terrorism, and the 2014 Basel Ministerial Council decision on the prevention of corruption. Now, these documents task the OSCE executive structures, so the Secretariat, but also the field operations, to assist participating states upon their request in formulating national policies, exchanging best practices and delivering capacity building activities and projects in the area of preventing and suppressing corruption. Moreover, it tasks the OSCE to deepen cooperation with national, regional and international initiatives promoting the principles of transparency, citizen participation and accountability. Ladies and gentlemen, the OSCE has worked closely with the UNODC over the past years to promote the ratification and implementation of the Convention among OSCE participating states, particularly by providing legal assistance in adapting national legislations to the requirements of the UNCAC and by facilitating exchange of knowledge, best practice and experience. Only over the past year, various OSCE-supported regional corruption prevention seminars for government officials, civil society and academia and the private sector from Eastern Europe and the South Caucasus have been organized across our region. They covered issues such as conflict of interest regulations and asset disclosure mechanisms, public-private partnerships in the fight against corruption, and public procurement. While tangible progress is being made in countries across our region, still a lot of work lies ahead of us. The OSCE will therefore lend further its support to the UNCAC review process, the forthcoming second cycle. In particular, we will be working closely with the UNODC, the OECD Anti-Corruption Network for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and others in identifying key topics and in organizing national and regional training seminars in the areas of corruption prevention, public procurement, asset recovery, and international cooperation. In an effort to further strengthen our anti-corruption portfolio, we have recently developed an extra budgetary project entitled Fostering a Participatory Approach Towards Prevention of Corruption in Central Asia. And once the project receives full funding, it will assist in strengthening cooperation among selected Central Asian governments, the private sector and civil society organizations towards implementing national corruption prevention policies in line with international standards. Distinguished participants, let me conclude by informing you that we look forward to the next year with great anticipation when one of the top priorities of the OSCE will be the topic of strengthening stability and security through cooperation on good governance under Germany's 2016 chairmanship of the OSCE. This renewed focus on good governance provides the OSCE participating states with an opportunity to follow up on some of the gaps and challenges that have been identified here in St. Petersburg, and to discuss in concrete terms how the OSCE, in cooperation and in coordination with others, can advance to close those gaps and meet those challenges. And let me end by expressing our readiness to continue working closely with many of you, governments, civil society and private sector in assisting with the implementation of the UNCAC commitments for a better future. Special thanks also to the government of the Russian Federation for hosting this important event here in St. Petersburg. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I give the floor now to Transparency International. You have the floor.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, dear delegates, colleagues, friends, уважаемые дамы и господа, коллеги, в первую очередь я...
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, firstly, allow me to express my gratitude to the leadership of UNODC for having invited civil society organizations to take part in this meeting. And my gratitude to the government of the Russian Federation for allowing us to be here, providing the opportunities for this, and our gratitude to all those delegates who have supported our proposals to improve transparency of the implementation review activities of UNCAC, and to all of those states and delegations which have supported the inclusion of item 7 on the agenda and intend to keep it on the agenda for future meetings. We respect the rules, of course, which have been established under UNCAC for the implementation of commitments under the Convention. And therefore, we believe that we need to take a further step forward towards improving implementation of the Convention, because life is not standing still, and all of the efforts of the states to combat corruption is involving more and more civil society organizations on a daily basis. NGOs are more and more involved in anti-corruption activities, so we believe it would be a good idea to review possibilities for NGOs and civil society in general to take part in the review mechanisms of UNCAC and their participation in the working bodies and working groups and subsidiary bodies of the Convention. This would not only allow the Convention to take a step forward, a genuine step forward, it would also increase the legitimacy and the authority of the results of the monitoring and review activities and the reliability for the citizens in whose name these activities are conducted. And in the 6th COSP, we have seen that there are many highly qualified professional civil society organizations who have come up with many different events and been involved in panel discussions, come up with many good ideas. In one of the panel discussions on the participation of civil society organizations in combating corruption, we heard one very important statement, which I think is quite correct, which is that the representatives of states who are reluctant to involve civil society organizations in the mechanisms of UNCAC are guided by the fact that should be guided by the fact that one day they might be a member of the government and the next day they might be a member of an NGO, and they might need this possibility to participate in these activities. And I think it would be a good idea for several governments and their representatives to consider this fact that they might not always be governed and might want this kind of participation themselves at some point in time. And also, those states who speak out against participation of NGOs in the implementation review process are those countries which are experiencing problems with NGOs, with human rights implementation, and I would like to urge them all to review their approach to NGOs and civil society organizations and allow them to fully participate in anti-corruption activities and to allow them to express their opinions, including on the implementation of the contents of UNCAC. And lastly, as I conclude, I would like to say that, once again, we cannot stand still. We can't tread water here. The states, the NGOs, civil society organizations, when we look at the major challenges facing us, the corruption of public officials, we cannot remain indifferent. And when we see the corruption of highly placed public officials, we are seeing stagnation in dealing with these issues. And Transparency International has produced material which has been disseminated at this conference, and in it we urge all of the state parties to UNCAC to start working on a definition for corruption of highly placed officials and working on legal mechanisms to combat this, mechanisms for the disclosure of income and measures for international cooperation in this particular matter, including for the abuse of immunity. In all of those countries where Transparency International is active, we see the possibility of the serious participation of NGOs, Transparency International and other partners in this work. We are prepared to shoulder our responsibilities to work on all of the issues that are raised, to provide professional cooperation and proposals. We very much hope that we would be able to work with you. We are fully prepared for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I give now the floor to Anti-Corruption Center, Russia.
Distinguished Chairman, distinguished participants of the conference, allow me to express our gratitude for this invitation to such an important UN event in the sphere of combating corruption, and to make a few comments on behalf of NGOs. One of the issues linked to the review mechanism is the participation of civil society in this institution. We believe that NGOs should be able to work on an equal footing, and these should be independent NGOs. The value in working with them hinges upon the possibility to speak freely and to make sure that their views are heard by member states. And so now I'd like to flag an issue which has become clear to us, which is that one highly supported materially and ideologically NGO has been dominating over others. And to illustrate this, I'd like to raise an issue that we came up against when we were discussing these issues here at the conference. Given the fact that we are facing now an unprecedented information revolution, the whole world is in the grips of it. We see that social networks are now seeing 2.5 billion accounts. That's some third of humanity. And so we, at a briefing for NGOs, made a proposal that we provide information to member states on how we could use these IT resources in anti-corruption initiatives. In this context, we prepared some wording for the UNCAC NGO coalition. However, one organization which is acting as the secretariat of the UNCAC coalition insisted that we do not include these points in the draft that they had prepared. They informed us that somewhere or other this draft had already been discussed with somebody or other and that it had already been agreed. But at the session that we had a representative of an NGO from the Republic of the Côte d'Ivoire, was not even allowed to speak and was advised just to make proposals in writing. Our NGO then wanted to stop this unequal dialogue. We believe that the whole series of countries that this NGO might try to evaluate would then simply lose interest in an interstate anti-corruption dialogue. The convention and its mechanisms are based on the principles of equality, of good faith, and a non-intrusive approach. And as I conclude, I would just underscore that there is some kind of monopoly of opinions in the NGOs at the conference. We consider it, therefore, to be premature and fraught with danger to have the fully fledged participation of NGOs in intergovernmental work under this convention. NGOs should, of course, be highly active in combating corruption at a national and international level. However, these must be free and independent NGOs, not ones which are coordinated by countries, and not only one single organization which discusses initiatives behind the scenes with someone or other and then formally raises them as a representative of NGOs to other NGOs, and then just implements its own projects and ideas. So I'd call upon the Secretariat of the conference to take measures to ensure the fully fledged equal participation of all NGOs, to make sure NGOs can participate on an equal footing. Once again, I'd like to thank you for the possibility to express my opinion here.
Thank you. I give the floor to the UNCAC coalition.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, first of all, I would like to express our condolences to the Russian people over the tragic flight crash. I would also like to express our solidarity with the people who have been detained 2 days ago in St. Petersburg outside of the conference venue because they were distributing leaflets promoting Article 20 of the Convention. This harassment demonstrates the shrinking space for civil society around the world and the risk each citizen needs to face when speaking out freely against corruption. The United Nations Convention Against Corruption is at a critical turning point. While the UNCAC has contributed to significant progress in the last decade, changed the political discourse on corruption, and proved itself an important global instrument, corruption continues to be a serious problem that affects every country. Given the scale of the challenge, much more is needed. Without collaboration and trust between governments and civil society, anti-corruption efforts worldwide cannot succeed. The UNCAC recognizes that addressing corruption requires comprehensive measures, including public participation and transparency. Corruption cannot be addressed in an environment of secrecy or where civil society is excluded. In the context of the UNCAC review process, there have been encouraging results in terms of transparency and participation at the national level, though more could be done to align practices with Article 13 of the Convention. More than 350 groups in the coalition are eager to contribute to the UNCAC review process and often face obstacles. These are groups with expertise and commitment to fighting corruption, and their involvement can make a great difference to the success of the Convention. However, in view of the positive experiences in the first cycle, it is timely for states parties to make transparency and consultation with civil society automatic in the second review cycle. Pending achievement of consensus on this issue, the UNCAC coalition calls on state parties to pledge support for transparency and public consultation in addressing corruption and to lead by example. States parties need to reaffirm the importance of transparency and public consultation in addressing corruption. Civil society can play a crucial role to prevent and combat corruption. Civil society can contribute to successful implementation of UNCAC provisions. Therefore, we ask states parties to commit themselves to follow the 6 principles of transparency during the second cycle of the UNCAC review process. 6 principles as follows. States parties shall publish updated review schedules for the country review. States parties shall share information about the review institution or the coordinator. States parties shall announce the completion of the country review, indicating where the report can be found. States parties shall promptly post online the self-assessment and the full country report in a United Nations language, together with the executive summary in local languages. States parties shall organize civil society briefings and public debates about the findings of the report. States parties shall publicly support participation of civil society observers in UNCAC subsidiary bodies. As we have heard from previous speakers, there are already several states parties which publicly announce their commitment to sign the pledge and follow its principles. We thank for their support, and we hope others will follow them in supporting transparency and civil society participation in the second review cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. And I give the floor now to GOPAC.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. GOPAC, Global Organisation of Parliamentarians Against Corruption, is a bipartisan, non-politically aligned NGO representing all parliamentarians committed to anti-corruption, and it serves both as an advocacy body and as having a resource role within UNCAC. GOPAC has a strong track record in helping to facilitate the rapid take-up of UNCAC ratification by member states, working closely with UNODC. GOPAC is unique in that it is the only international network of parliamentarians focused solely on combating corruption. Its members represent more than 60 countries in all regions of the world. A number of GOPAC members are ministers and parliamentarians attending this Conference of State Parties as head or a member of their nation's delegation, and many come from an NGO background. In many of our nations, it is the parliament, not just the government, which becomes the state party, which approves international conventions. It has proven beneficial and makes enormous sense for parliamentarians and civil society in total to be engaged in the benefits of UNCAC and also in the review process. UNCAC acknowledges the role of civil society in tackling corruption, in prevention activities and enforcement efforts. UNCAC's Article 13 explicitly recognises that role. GOPAC supports the position of Finland in presenting its proposal for conference room paper on civil society engagement, and the EU group, along with many others, for their support of inclusion in CSOs in the implementation review group and working group process. GOPAC supports the position of the UNCAC Coalition and Transparency International in acknowledging that over the first cycle of reviews of the UNCAC implementation review mechanism, the value of civil society participation has been demonstrated in practice, with CSOs involved in 85% of the 114 in-country visits undertaken, and many contributing their inputs via detailed analytical reports and other helpful technical commentary. As a member organisation made up of current and former parliamentarians, GOPAC fully supports and understands the primacy of the sovereign status of the nation-state. We also see no contradiction in that respect and the reasoned proposal by the EU and others to enable CSO participation in UNCAC processes. GOPAC strongly supports the position of Lebanon in this debate to include parliamentarians and civil society in UNCAC processes. We welcome the statement of Lebanon and his nation's commitment to including parliamentarians in their delegations, Mexico's support for CSO and the private sector's involvement, Italy's view to significantly strengthen the role of NGOs in the second review cycle. We note and support that the US, France, Mali, Poland, UK and many others have aligned during the debate to look at engaging in a more positive, extensive way and to support the UNCAC Coalition's call on state parties to pledge support for transparency and public consultation and to lead by example. And we also note the strong commitment already from the Pacific nations, who have already integrated strong parliamentary, private sector and civil society involvement into UNCAC. Thank you.
شكراً. وحيث كان المتحدث.
Thank you. That was the last speaker on our list. So that is GOPAC was the last speaker on our list. We have now concluded the statements this afternoon, and having heard all of these statements, I'd like to propose to interested delegations that they coordinate their different opinions on the draft provisional agenda to be examined and adopted tomorrow. I think that most of us would like to see this draft agenda being adopted tomorrow, and so we need to make sure there's no obstacles in the way for the adoption of this provisional draft agenda. It is provisional, so we really would like to see it adopted. And through cooperation, I'm sure that we could find a solution to this issue, which I hope is really quite a simple one at the end of the day. Before I conclude, I'd like to give the floor to the Secretariat for some announcements.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Two announcements. Tomorrow at 9:45, the Bureau of the Conference meets in UNODC Conference Room L008, and the regional group, the African group, meets in Conference Room CMS L020 at 9 o'clock. Thank you very much.
I thank the Secretariat for those announcements, and I now declare the 9th meeting of our conference closed.
9th was the 7th, item 7.
No, 9th session, 9th meeting.
No, but we're not closing the Yes, but the 9th meeting is...